RPG no longer means role-playing game, not in the way it used to. Now it means whatever the hell the label needs to mean that day. Revised product guide, retail profit generator, rewriting previous genres. Yeah, that's sarcasm. But it's sarcasm for a reason. Because somewhere along the line, RPG stopped being a design description and started becoming a badge, a prestige label. Something you stick onto a game to make it sound deeper, smarter, bigger, more serious than action game or action adventure. And once that happened, the word began to die. Go back for a second. People love acting like this confusion was always there, like genres were always loose, and nobody ever really knew what anything meant. I don't buy that. I remember a time when the lines felt clearer. I remember asking a simple question. What Bethesda games are on PS2? And the answer is already weird, because the Bethesda people remembered for giant open-world RPGs is not the Bethesda that lived on PS2. Back then, Morrowind was explicitly said to be PC and Xbox only. That matters, because the point is not just that Bethesda skipped PS2 with its big open-world RPG identity. The point is that there was a time when people still more or less understood what kind of game they were talking about. Action-adventure meant something. RPG meant something. Shooter meant something. Not perfectly, not mathematically, but enough. And here's the part I think people memory hole. There was a social status attached to those labels. I'm not even talking about player versus player trash talk.
You call that a fireball? I've seen campfire scarier.
Keep talking while your health bar melts.
All right, big words. Try dodging this. Whirlwind cleave!
Telegraph that from orbit. Watch your feet.
I mean bystanders, parents, random kids, random adults. The air around the words themselves. Action-adventure could get treated like dumb fun. RPG could get treated like the smart people genre. Not always respected, no. Sometimes mocked. But mocked in that very specific way nerdy things get mocked when people also quietly assume they're for imaginative or intellectual types. One review of role-playing game stereotypes literally describes the stereotypical RPG gamer as highly intelligent and imaginative, even while also burdened by other negative stereotypes. That right there is the spark. Because once a label carries status, people want it. Publishers want it. Journalists want it. Storefronts want it. Marketing wants it. Review language wants it. Genre labels were never just harmless little filing cabinets. Scholars writing about the video game genre point out that publishers and retailers organized products around genre. Players learned to identify themselves through genre. And genre terms could function not just as definitions, but as marketing tools or audience triggers. The same scholarship also argues that modern game labels can create a genre illusion, in which one umbrella term is stretched across very different things, and pretends they're more unified than they really are. That is basically the whole scam. And no, I do not mean some cartoon villain sat in a boardroom one day and said, "Let us now destroy the meaning of RPG." That's too simple. What I mean is worse. Status, incentives, and repetition did the work. Then Call of Duty comes in, and before somebody gets cute, I am not saying Call of Duty is an RPG. I'm saying it helped normalize something that mattered, progression as a cultural signal. Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare was described by GameSpot as having a class-based progression system that had a major impact on multiplayer shooters for years, and PC Gamer flat out called it a pioneer of multiplayer progression. That changed people, not because shooters became RPGs, because progression stopped feeling like it belonged to the RPG space. Unlocks, perks, class building, stickiness, reward loops. The feeling that your time investment itself proves depth. That psychology spread. So now you had more and more games borrowing one of the external signals, people associated with serious progression, without actually becoming role-playing games in the older sense. Then the next layer hits. Cinematic prestige. This is where God of War matters. Again, not because God of War suddenly became a classic RPG. Even PlayStation still categorizes 2018's God of War as action/adventure, while also describing it as a reimagining that fused brutal combat and epic boss fights with a powerful narrative. Read that carefully. Action, adventure, powerful narrative. That's important because it shows the shift wasn't always in the game first. Sometimes it was in the conversation around the game. Cinematic action got elevated. It got prestige. It got the language of seriousness. And once action games had progression systems, dramatic storytelling, customization, and longer runtimes, a whole lot of people started talking like that was close enough to RPG. And that is where I think the label really broke. Because an action-adventure game is not automatically an RPG just because it wants to look expensive. A game is not role-playing just because it has a story. A game is not role-playing just because numbers go up. A game is not role-playing just because gear exists. A game is not role-playing just because there are dialogue wheels that lead back to the same outcome anyway. That is not depth. That is garnish. Older genre boundaries were never perfect, but they at least tried to point at design. Scholars still describe industry genre language as player-centric and rooted in mechanics and design patterns, even while admitting that current labels are fuzzy and often overlapping. So here's my problem. RPG used to point, at minimum, toward the idea that you were building or inhabiting a role through systems that mattered, stats that mattered structurally, choices that mattered structurally, a build that mattered structurally, some actual relationship between identity, systems, and outcome. Action-adventure was something else, usually more authored, more fixed, more guided, more about controlling a hero through a designed sequence than shaping a role through a system. Those are not identical things. And when a culture keeps pretending they are, one of two things is true. Either the word RPG has become so broad that it says almost nothing, or the word got hijacked because it sounded better on the box. I think it's both. And here's the nastiest part. I don't think this happened only because of the mechanics. I think it happened because of status. Because if one genre label sounds smarter, richer, deeper, and more respectable than another one, then sooner or later, people are going to start dragging that label onto the products they most want to elevate. Not because they earned it, because they wanted the glow. So no, I don't think the story is just genres evolved. That's the soft version. I think the harder truth is this. A design label got converted into a prestige label, and once that happened, the industry kept transferring that prestige onto more marketable action games until people forgot the difference. That is why the word feels hollow now. That is why people can look at an action-adventure game, a progression-based shooter, or a cinematic combat game, and casually call all of them RPGs with a straight face. Not because the designs became identical, because the language got corrupted. And the moment language gets corrupted, memory goes with it. That's why this conversation matters, because some people still remember when the categories felt different. Some people still remember when calling something an RPG actually narrowed the meaning instead of blowing it open. Some people still remember when the industry described what a game was, not what sounded more prestigious in a trailer. Only those who remember see the spark.